Hello, hello, hello. For a long time I have described myself as a small c conservative. Indeed, in my earliest videos on this channel, that is the place where I was coming from. However, as I have learned more and more about the true nature of politics, I have come to view conservatism as a completely useless philosophy that offers no workable solutions to the awful situation we today find ourselves in. If anything, conservatism does nothing other than prolong our national decline. And no, the issue is not merely with the traitorous capital C Conservative Party, but the philosophy of conservatism on the whole. Watch this to understand why. As an ex-conservative, I feel I'm in a reasonably good position to say what the basic essence of conservatism is. In a single sentence, conservatism is the march of progress as guided by culture and tradition through slow, steady, sensible reform. However, what most conservatives fail to appreciate is the forces that actually cause a culture and its traditions to change. We on the true right understand that far from being shaped randomly by mysterious forces of the universe and growing organically, culture is instead downstream of law, which is itself downstream of power. The debate about whether culture is downstream of power or is truly organic could make a whole video in and of itself, and I'm sure that debate exists elsewhere on this platform too, but for now, that is the position I will run with. If enough people want me to argue the case of culture in a later video, I will do so, but it would be too long for this one here. Anyway, if we are to accept that culture is indeed downstream of power, that means that cultural change is dependent on the incentives of whatever ruling elites we happen to have. For a monarchy or aristocracy, wherein the power and thus the incentives lie with the people and the land, this is no bad thing. However, for anything else, anything viable to last more than 3 generations that is, the incentives are commercial and selfish. This is as true of your typical corrupt African dictatorship as it is of your typical Western managerial oligarchy pretending to be a democracy. For the conservative, this means that the precious culture and tradition they are using as their guiding force are downstream of these power factions. This isn't always obvious, especially as there are usually a couple of decades of lag between a social policy being enacted and becoming mainstream. But conservatism does eventually shift to be guided by the new cultural reality and the new assumptions of the time. Conservatism is thus always de facto pro-regime, regardless of what regime actually rules. With few exceptions, the modern conservative will only ever advocate for the world of his youth or the world of about 20 years prior. He may oppose today's woke BS, but he's all for yesterday's woke BS. It's why David Starkey, Douglas Murray, Nigel Farage, Matt Goodwin, and even Rupert Lowe and Peter Hitchens will always, in the final analysis, come out in defence of liberalism. This is cuck-servatism. I mean, look at all the times when David Starkey has proudly boasted that the British Constitution enabled the expansion of the voting franchise from aristocracy to universal suffrage without a single shot being fired. What sort of victory is that? Well, it simply isn't victory at all. It's nothing less than pure, unadulterated cope. Simple as. If you truly cannot tell why universal suffrage is bad, why no-fault divorces are a disaster, why egalitarian efforts are evil, or why we should not be flagellating ourselves for the sake of the foreigner, then you are both an idiot and an enemy. As such, conservatism ultimately fails to tell what is good and what is not. It is guided by culture and tradition, sure, but what if the culture is flawed or decaying, as Western culture undeniably is? What if our old traditions have been lost, replaced with new modern liberal traditions that are completely awful? What if the system of governments is already as close to perfection as it can possibly be? What then are conservatives on their slow, steady, sensible march of progress through reform headed towards? What to a conservative is ultimately good and ultimately bad? It seems to me that small c conservatism does not have proper answers to these questions and thus offers no solution to a world already run by a regime that is evil. Other than the problem of culture, wherein conservatism clearly lacks any solid guiding principles or positive vision, there is the matter of revolution. When Edmund Burke, father of conservatism, founded the philosophy, he did so in response to the French Revolution. The French Revolution was in every way a disaster. The decades of instability it caused, the sheer absurdity of the efforts to become martyrs over nature, the mass killings and the authoritarianism, In every way, it was totally a disaster. And for what? The monarchy was overturned only for Napoleon Bonaparte to declare himself emperor anyway. And so, naturally, this elicited quite a strong response from Burke. However, Burke's chief objection to the revolution was not the ends, but the means. As I said, conservatism fails to identify what good ends look like, and Burke was a Whig, a progressive of his day. But yes, the chief lesson that Burke took from the French Revolution was that revolutions are, without fail, disastrous. Indeed, revolution is the Conservatives' #1 paralytic fear. And not without good reason. The total upturning and rewriting of society, according to untested radical ideas, is something that inevitably leads to disaster. However, for the Conservative, this tends to go both ways. Not only do they fear the radical implementation of new ideas, but they also fear the radical return to old ideas too. What this aversion to revolution really means then is that Conservatives will always act to dampen any reaction against the ruling regime. Thus, they are always the regime's greatest defenders. They are the idiots who tell people that rather than arguing for what is true and right absolutely, even when it's totally outside of mainstream thought, they should instead try to shift the Overton window, enact cultural change, or educate the masses. Slow and steady reform, not radical action, not independent thought. Indeed, conservatives and perhaps naive libertarians are the only ones who believe in such nonsense concepts as the Overton window. Liberals don't believe it. They may adopt the idea to enact change slowly and palatably enough so as to not cause a popular uprising, in the same way one might boil a frog, but they still have a vision of utopia and still argue for that on its own terms. The left too don't believe it. They'll just argue for socialism regardless of what you think about it. And we on the true right don't believe in it either. We view it as a tool of containment designed to limit what we can advocate for. Only conservatives are this dumb. Essentially, what I'm getting at is that conservatives do not understand capital P power, and they have no will to power. Whilst we on the right advocate for things, even when controversial, because we think they are good, and would happily bias the institutions in our favour, again because we think we are good, conservative ideas are always expressed in relation to how things are now today, and never deviate outside of mainstream thought. They may hold ideals, such as a return to this or that era, but they will never seriously argue for such a thing or force a return to the policies of these times. Such action would be too radical and too fast for a conservative. They quite literally would not think it possible. In this regard then, conservatism is arguably better seen as a process than a proper ideology. It's movement in whatever direction the ruling elites want, provided said movement is sufficiently slow. I'm not saying that conservatives can't enact positive change. In fact, I'd argue that it's quite clear that they can. However, this change will only ever be return to Fresh Prince, never a true effort at creating a proper right-wing rule, aka monarchy or aristocracy, not in any real sense at least. In a time such as now where our ruling regime is pure evil, thriving through sheer deception, and for the sole benefit of a handful of merchant elites and the people around them, we need so much more. And conservatism simply does not offer that. To be fair to conservatism, the high value placed on tradition is the right idea, but the problem is always what happens when the culture decays and traditions are abandoned. The brute fact that culture is downstream of the diktats of whatever faction rules is one that conservatives do not recognise and have no answer to. In the final analysis, conservatives fail to grasp the true nature of power, lack a proper vision of what is ultimately good, will only ever advocate for things within the Overton window, a window created by their enemies, and would rather accept abject misery than risk revolutionary change. Thus, they will always end up being the defenders of the ruling regime, no matter what that regime is. Therefore, conservatism, as a philosophy in our modern world, offers practically nothing. Worse still, their naive hope and fear of radical change do nothing other than keep the right contained and clueless. I, for one, think we should abandon conservatism and condemn it to the bin of history. Who is with me? Anyway, that is all. I'm sure many of you will have gone into this video with strong sympathies for conservatism, so such a video might have been a shock. Also, there were a number of assumptions made in this video that I believe to be totally true, but which could probably do with a proper justification in another video. If there are any such concepts that you think fall into this category that you would like me to talk about at greater length, then do please let me know. Other than that, I thank you for watching. As always, please like, subscribe, and God save the King.